Hi there, this is Kevin Saxton, the Managing Director at Camp Judson, and I would like to take a few minutes of your time to walk you through the long-range vision for the future of Camp Judson that the Camp Board has been working on over the last couple years. I want to start by talking about how we got to be where we are in this process and the process that we went through. And if I take you back to the beginning, we started by taking a look at what our mission was and what we believed that God was calling us to do as a camp and as a retreat center in the years going forward. And as we went through that process of discernment and praying and discussing, what we found was that our mission really hasn't changed over the last 60 plus years. We believe that God is still calling us to do roughly the same things that He was calling us to do back in 1949 when the camp was formed. And we kind of can categorize those things into three main areas. The first is that we want to be assisting children, youth, and adults in taking the next step in their relationship with God. We want to meet them where they're at and to help them to grow, help them to take that next step, whatever that is for them. So for a camper who comes to camp who may have never heard of Jesus before, we want to help them to discover who Jesus is. For a camper or a retreat guest who maybe has been a Christian for a little while or maybe for a long time, we help them to take that next step with God and grow in deeper relationship, maybe discover that God is calling them to do something, or maybe help them to see areas in their life that God is calling them to make a greater commitment or a greater change. But whatever that is for them, to take the next step in relationship to God. The second thing is we want to foster and encourage the growth of healthy relationships between people. So often in the world today, we see people and relationships in our communities, in our families, in our churches that aren't necessarily always the healthiest. And we want Judson to be a place where people can experience what healthy relationships look like, how God has called us to care for each other and love one another and live in relationship to each other, that as we put together our programs, as we offer opportunities for people to gather in fellowship, that healthy relationships between people would be fostered. The third thing is we want Judson to be a place in a ministry that supports and encourages families and local churches, to offer them with opportunities for growth, to grow closer together, to offer them with opportunities for encouragement, that they might be inspired to follow God more closely and to live out the call that God has put upon their lives and upon their ministries. And so as we started out with the mission, we then kind of looked at, well, if this is what our mission is, what then would that look like from a programming standpoint? And we started by looking at summer, and in the summertime, wanting to focus on summer camp and for children and for teens and for families, and making summer camp as good as it can possibly be. We feel that summer camp is a program that we do reasonably well, and we want to make it better though, so that it can be even more effective and it might draw more people to camp and to Christ. And as we went through the process, we realized that we feel like we're a pretty good steward of the facility that we have for 3 to 4 months of the year in the summer months. But as we looked at the rest of the calendar, that we weren't necessarily utilizing the facility that we have to the best of our ability in the other months of the year. And so as we looked at the rest of the year, we took some time to think about the kind of programming that we would want to offer that would be in keeping with our mission, as well as fit and meet the needs of the individuals and the families and the churches that we're attempting to serve. And so what we came away with was, in the fall, developing more retreat programs that are geared for adults and for churches and for families, and also mirroring that kind of in the spring with retreats for adults and churches and families, that we might provide support and encouragement and growth opportunities for them. And then in the wintertime, mirroring kind of the summer by resourcing primarily youth ministries in churches through winter youth retreats. We already run our Winter Blast youth weekends through the wintertime. This year in 2017, we'll be running 3 different weekends. And those weekends are a time for us to serve youth ministries, particularly youth ministries that may not be large enough to host their own retreat or put together their own retreat, but to minister to youth groups and to youth ministries in the winter months. And then to fill in the rest of the calendar with facility rentals from churches and community organizations, etc., to make sure that we are being as good of a steward of the property and the facility that God has blessed us with as we can possibly be. So after looking at our mission and after looking at the kinds of programming that we would want to offer, we then came to the point of, well, what does that mean for our facilities? What do we need to do to our facilities in order to be able to offer the kinds of programming that we're talking about? And so we began by kind of taking a look at the facilities that we have and identifying some things that need some attention because many of our buildings are 40 years old or older and have natural aging and maintenance issues that need to be addressed, as well as not necessarily suiting the needs of people today in the 21st century. And then what we did to begin to seek solutions for facility needs was we partnered with a consulting firm from Colorado called Fleetmeyer & Lee, who specializes in working with Christian camps and conference centers all across the country to put together a facility master plan to guide the growth and development of our facilities, to help us make sure that we weren't creating additional issues for ourselves by putting buildings in the wrong place or by designing facilities incorrectly that didn't meet our needs or wouldn't meet our needs for the long term, as well as trying to make Judson, in terms of our facility layout, really fit what we're trying to do as a ministry. And so Fleetmeyer & Lee sent two folks out to us for 2 days in the summer of 2015, and basically they did a site survey and kind of watched how we use things and watched how people move and how we use different parts of the camp, and they put together a 60-some page report with lots of maps and graphs, showing how we use our land and the slope and the way the water flows and different soil types and the way that vehicle as well as pedestrian traffic flow, and then gave the board a number of master plan concepts for the design and the development of the property that the board then kind of dialogued with Fleetmeyer & Lee, giving them feedback on what we liked versus what we didn't like, and kind of dialoguing back and forth until we arrived at the master plan that the board adopted in May of 2016, and is seeking to develop in this next year and over the coming years as we begin to go into a capital campaign phase to implement the master plan. But there are 4 different design considerations that Fleetmeyer & Lee identified in walking through the master plan process. And the first one was they wanted to create or enhance a heart of camp, which serves as both a physical and sociological center of camp, kind of like the place where everybody gathers, kind of the place that's the center of everything. Currently, we at Judson already have a location that's kind of like that, and that's where the dining hall and the pavilion and the basketball court kind of are. That's kind of the center. That kind of is where people spend the most amount of time and where people tend to gather. And so Fleetmeyer & Lee was sought in their design proposals to enhance that, so that not only does that continue to be the heart of camp, but that as buildings are renovated and added, that becomes even more so the heart of Camp Judson, both physically and sociologically. The second design consideration was they felt we really needed to embrace the lake by improving access and connection for all campers and guests and maximizing and enhancing views of the lake. One of the comments that they made is that there are lots of camps that have a lake, but there aren't many camps that have a great lake. And our connection and our frontage on Lake Erie is something that is rare in the Christian camping world and in the camping world in general. And it's a unique feature that we need to embrace and enhance and really take advantage of. The third thing was they wanted to account for improving safety and security in the design process, so that addressing some safety and security concerns that that they identified as they went through their site survey. One of the things that they noticed was the road that connects Holiday Road with Virginia's Beach, that we also use as an access for our dining hall and the Corbley complex. Basically, the fact that runs right through the middle of camp and right through the heart of camp is potentially a safety issue. That our campers in the summertime have to cross that road at least 6 times a day, just simply to go to and from meals, as well as for other activities or to go to the lake, etc. And so that was something that they felt needed to be addressed, as well as the fact that people that we don't know are crossing the camp property right through the middle of where campers often are, and that was a safety and security consideration they looked to address. The fourth thing was seeking to improve our guest accommodations. If you have been to Judson in the last several years, you probably are aware that many of our cabins are kind of as they were 15, 20 years ago, if not more. And not so much with kids, but to a degree with kids, but especially with adults, many folks are not looking for those kind of accommodations when they're looking to come to a camp. They're looking for something that's a little more up to date. They're looking for air conditioning and things like that. And so we want to improve the guest accommodations that we offer so that we would be more attractive and engaging for groups. So those are the 4 considerations that kind of went into the master plan. Which brings us to a map of the plan itself. And in that map of the plan, which you see on the screen here, there are a number of things that I would want to point out. And so I will start along the Lake Erie shoreline and work our way south. And as I do that, basically I'm just kind of working north to south in a way to kind of organize it so we don't miss anything, so that you catch all the features of the plan. Not so much in an order of importance or in an order that we would do things, just to kind of organize it in that fashion. And so as we start along the lakefront, the first thing that you notice is that the campground, which currently kind of sits right along the bluff for about 3/4 of the length of our frontage on Lake Erie, gets shifted from running right on the bluff to being on the east boundary of the property along Holiday Road, with improved sites that, in addition to having water and electric, would also have sewer hookups, so that our campground guests would not have to haul their sewage to a dump station or anything like that. And with a bathhouse in that area, and also adding a pavilion to use for picnics or for folks from the campground to gather right along the shoreline in an area where it would not be we would not be concerned about erosion or anything like that. Possibly adding some fire pits along the bluff where people could gather for campfires, to watch the sunset, etc. In addition to that, in kind of the center of the bluff along the lake shore, taking and kind of sculpting that out into a gradual bowl up into the field, which would do 2 things. Number one, it would enhance the connection to the lake and kind of create almost a natural landscaped invitation for people to be drawn to the lake. It might be a good place for people to gather kind of there along the beach. The bowl would kind of be grassy. It wouldn't be, we wouldn't be adding sand or, changing the shoreline or anything like that. But basically he's kind of sculpting that area so it was kind of a bowl that fed down to the lake. The other thing that would serve to do is currently the lower field, which sits between the dining hall and the campground, there's kind of a low spot where it's often wet. And the reason for that is there's a kind of a slight increase in elevation that kind of runs through the campground, which underground is largely clay, which prevents the water from kind of draining out of that field. And so the hope is that by creating that bowl, that would also enhance the drainage of that field a little more usable for a variety of things in months where it's often wet. As we continue to move south a little bit, you'll notice that the road has been shifted. So instead of it going from where the sign is now over to the entrance to Virginia's Beach, the road would shift northward. And so the entrance along Holiday Road would be somewhere around where the softball field is currently here at camp, and kind of moving in a curved pattern so that to help control speed of people going through the property and entering Virginia's Beach at basically the same place that they enter now, and then on through their security gate. It would also service the new parking area that we would have over on the west end of the property in between the Corbly Complex and the activity center that's been proposed. So the road would shift there. So now over on the west side of the property along the road, you notice a couple things. First of all, you see a staff house, housing that would be added for some year-round staff, and we'll get to that in a little bit. You also see an activity center, which would kind of like be a gym with a stage and possibly a rock wall, probably moving the camp store over into that building. So, kind of enhancing that area as the heart of camp. The activity center would provide a great place for kids to gather in the summertime when the weather isn't great, as well as in the spring and fall seasons and in the winter season for retreat groups to have activities and such. The activity center could be used in addition to recreational things. It could also be used if we wanted to have a large dinner or a meal for an event, for rally day or for a reunion or a fundraising event. Instead of having to go off-site to another facility or to a church or whatever to have that event, we could have that right here on site and be able to seat a couple hundred people in the activity center pretty easily. The activity center would also greatly increase our capacity and our ability to host crafting groups. Currently, the crafting groups that we have are kind of limited in the space that they can gather, and the largest space that we can put them in is in the dining hall, which normally limits those crafting groups to about 25, 30 people at a time. If we didn't have to have them in the dining hall and we had kind of a gym-sized space where we could set them up with tables and stuff like that, there would be a lot more room and potentially a lot more people that we could serve in that way and draw to camp in that way. You also notice that there's an addition there to the dining hall, and to increase the seating capacity and also to enhance the views of the dining hall has of the lake. Currently, if you look out the windows at the dining hall and look in a straight line, basically you look at the corner of the property where roughly the bathhouse is down along Holiday Road. But basically this addition, the new windows would face the shoreline and run parallel to the shoreline, so that in the summertime, basically the sunset would occur right in the middle of those new windows on that north-facing wall. Kind of shifting over to the east side of the property, just south of the road, you see 4 duplex cabins, and I'll get into the design of that in a few minutes, as far as what those look like and what they hold. And 4 duplex cabins with some parking, and those cabins would be used not just for summer camp, but for retreat groups, and would be a great place for adults and for families to use as well, with a parking area so folks can park their cars right there at the cabin. Shifting around, you'll notice over on the opposite side, over just north of the Prayer Tower, you'll notice a duplex cabin there as well. And then 2 duplex cabins just to the east of the Prayer Tower, roughly where cabin 4 sits today. And then an 8th duplex cabin kind of on the hillside above the pond. Again, I'll come back to those duplex cabins in a minute, but if we built all those duplex cabins, basically the Corbly complex would likely be converted into meeting space. We really wouldn't have to do anything to do that, just simply move the beds out and replace that with chairs or tables or whatever in those spaces. But because of the large rooms there, that would make it very easy to use that building in that way. But we would only do that if we built out all 8 of those cabins. We wouldn't necessarily build all 8 cabins, but basically as we went through this design process, one of the things that we wanted to make sure we did was look at what would be the maximum number of beds and cabins we would want to have, and so that we wouldn't decide at a later date that we needed to have more of them but not be sure about where we would put them. we designed the master plan in a way that this would be the maximum number of cabins we would want to have. Other things you'll notice there, the basketball court is kind of right where it is. You'll notice that the pavilion, the current pavilion that's kind of along the drive over to Virginia's Beach is removed. You'll also notice that there's a lot more trees and green buffer that's added to kind of the edges of the property and some other places to enhance the landscaping. You'll notice that the pool it is renovated, and basically the pool would get kind of a facelift where we would add a kind of a gradual sloping area into the current pool where so you'd have like a zero entry, so families with small kids or our day campers or mini campers who may not feel comfortable in the 2.5-3 feet of water currently in the shallow end of our pool would be able to just kind of walk right into the pool down a gradual slope, which would also improve handicap access. We also want to add a splash pad near that shallow end of the pool so that our families who come to family camp or to the campground, as well as some of our day campers and mini campers who maybe want to get wet but don't really want to go in the pool, have a place to kind of splash around as well. You'll notice that there's another staff house kind of on the southeast corner there, near the tree line, which would be used for year-round staff as well. And then you'll notice that Shreve Lodge is still there, and Shreve Lodge would be renovated and probably the offices shifted upstairs so that they look out onto the camp, kind of where we do registration right now with the old dining room. Sometimes it's also called the staff lounge, becoming kind of like the reception area of the office, and moving our offices upstairs and probably moving the nurse's office into the basement. In the woods with the upper cabins, with the Highlands cabins, basically we would keep those buildings, but use them in different ways. We probably would keep 2 of them to use as overflow housing for either, regular campers, or especially to use them for our Trailblazer program or bad weather, so that they have a designated place to go rather than putting them in whatever space we can find to fit them in. Currently, they would have a designated cabin to go to in bad weather. Additionally, we've talked about other uses for some of those cabins, including using them for storage or using one for kind of a woodworking shop for campers, so that campers can do kind of woodworking projects as an addition to our activities at camp, but at the same time not have them in kind of the industrial area where we have all of our equipment down in the garage, kind of giving a designated area where the equipment that we feel comfortable with campers having access to being there. Possibly using another one of those cabins to be kind of an outdoor education or a nature education building, where maybe we have some small woodland creatures or reptiles or amphibians or fish or whatever for kids to learn about, as well as serving as kind of like a classroom where they can learn about God's creation and what God has made in a kind of an enclosed space. Other things that may want to point out, the house that the managing director currently lives in would kind of stay the same. That pretty much covers the entirety of the plan. Let me take a moment and kind of show you what some of the cabins might look like, so that you can get a picture of those. This is a drawing of one of the duplex cabins, and this cabin has a porch on the front of it instead of having a meeting room. There's also another design, which I'll show you here, that has a meeting room on the front of it. We haven't yet determined how many of the cabins would have the meeting room, or how many of them would just have a porch on the front of it. The way that these cabins are designed is so that on the lower level, there's 2 different bunk rooms, and each bunk room would have 12 to 14 bunks in it. And the top bunks would be designed so that they could fold away into the wall. So if we have a family or an adult group that's in that cabin space and doesn't want to use the top bunks, they can fold them away and have more headroom. Or if they want to leave them out and use them for their suitcases or whatever, they can do that. But for summer camp, all those bunks would be out, and we would have space for 12 to 14 people in terms of campers and counselors on each side of the lower level. And then each side of it would have its own bathroom and with a mechanical room on the back where the hot water heater and the furnace and all those mechanicals would be, with a door on the back side of it so that maintenance staff can access it and make repairs or look at equipment without having to enter into the cabin space and disrupt whatever's going on in the cabin. You'll notice with the meeting space there in the front, that would provide a gathering space for not only summer campers, but especially for retreat groups to gather and, to meet together, or, with a smaller crafting group or some other type of group that wants to meet and set up tables in that space, they could do that. You'll notice that there's a stairway kind of in between the two sides that goes up to the upper level. And in the upper level, in kind of the attic space, there would be 2 additional rooms that would be designed to house 2 to 4 people. So either a family or a group of, a small group of adults. Each of those rooms upstairs would have its own bathroom. And those would be ideal for families, for adult groups, as well as in the summertime. One of the challenges we currently face is not having enough rooms or places for volunteer directors or store people, or people who want to come and help out with maintenance things in the summertime or help out in the kitchen. We don't really have a place for them to stay unless they have a camper, because right now we only have about 4 spaces that we can use for that. Because of each of these duplex cabins would have 2 of these rooms up in kind of the attic space. With eight buildings like that, we'd have 16 spaces, which would provide us with plenty of space for our directors and Bible study leaders, as well as our store managers, etc. It also would give us a place where we could put some of our senior summer staff in the summertime, so that they wouldn't necessarily have to live with the staff that they're supervising over the course of the summer, which sometimes is a challenge. But we believe that this design would be a good solution for the housing needs that we have here at Judson. Fleet Meyer & Lee, you'll notice from the pictures that are there, Fleet Meyer & Lee has built these at a number of different camps around the country. So this is a design that they've used elsewhere, and the camps that have used them have been very satisfied and have really liked the flexibility of the buildings. And so we kind of come to the end of things here, and basically one of the first questions that I'm usually asked when I talk about this is, so what's next? What's first? And currently the camp board is working to determine how we're going to proceed with this, looking at different fundraisers as far as helping us through the process of running a capital campaign to pay for these improvements. I'm also being asked, what would we build first? And there's a number of different things we're looking at, from the pool to maybe some housing or even the activity center. But ultimately, we're looking for God to guide that decision, because a case can be made for a number of different things that we could begin with. Folks asked about how long this might take. Really, it will take as long as it takes for the money to come in. And while we know that the funding for this, the price tag will be relatively high, we believe that our God has the funds in hand to be able to accomplish this, and we believe that He's calling us to pursue this as we seek to impact more kids, more teenagers, more adults, more families, and more churches throughout northwestern Pennsylvania and northeastern Ohio and southwestern New York. And so we ask that you would join us in praying, and praying some more, that God would move in a mighty way, that He would supply all our needs, that He would guide our steps, that this vision would become a reality, and that we might here at Judson help people grow closer to God, closer to one another, and that churches and families might be strengthened through the ministry of Camp Judson. I want to thank you for taking the time to sit and watch and listen to me for a little bit as I talk about this. If you have any comments or feedback, we'd love to hear them. You can either email us at judson@campjudson.com, or you can respond to us on social media. You can reach out to us on through a private message on our Facebook page, or you can even call the camp office at 814-922-3834. We would love to hear from you, and we would love for you to join us in praying that God's will would be done here at Judson. Thank you very much for your support. Have a great day.